Ali Weiss, Project Director for Iran at the International Crisis Group. Thank you. Let's move from Washington, D.C. with Ali. Let's go to Rotterdam and bring in retired Colonel James Creighton, serving for 34 years in the US Army, commanding the NATO brigade in Afghanistan, serving too as Chief of Planning for the ISAF force, the International Security Assistance Force there, and former Chief of Staff of Command Team for Space and the Global Strike Force in the US. Jim's also the author of the book, Coalition Leaderships, Lessons Learned While Commanding a NATO Brigade in Afghanistan. Colonel, welcome to France 24. We're going to talk about the NATO summit in just a moment, coming up on Tuesday, which is about to start. Can I get your thoughts, first of all, on the aerial war ongoing between Israel and Iran and your military assessment?
Yeah, no, that war, it seems to me, has been a long time coming. And it looks like your commentary this afternoon has been excellent. I think that any thought on regime change is making something sounds pretty easy, but it's very difficult to do. And the Iranian regime has been in existence for a long time, and I think any thought that we have of regime change is a long fight. It's not going to happen overnight. And so, go ahead.
No, to which point, and given your time within the US military and your awareness of the capabilities, the threat from Iran, plus the rhetoric on top of that of what Iran is and says it is capable of, and the danger warnings out there. I've seen some commentators in Iran, or on Iran rather than in Iran, saying that Iran is a paper tiger, that these threats, without being a nuclear power, there's only so much capability that we've seen play out in 8 days. Would you agree with that?
Well, I don't know that I would. I mean, I think Saddam Hussein thought that Iran was a paper tiger, and that lasted 8 years and cost hundreds of thousands of casualties. Even the attacks on Esfahan and Natanz, one of your commentators just mentioned that those are surface targets. Much of that capability is well beneath the surface of the earth, and it remains to be seen how much of a setback that actually is. So it might look good from a satellite, but until you can confirm what happened well beneath the surface of the earth, you really don't know how much damage you've done.
If you were asked, and part of a military team asked for an assessment from the President of the US right now, and you were asked for advice and thoughts on whether it's worthwhile to be bombing nuclear facilities in Fordo, what would your take be?
Well, I having thought through that many times, that's a very tough target to hit. And Iran does have a huge military with a lot of capability. And, as your commentary on Cyprus, they have tentacles that go a long way. On the other hand, if I'm sitting in Israel and I've got Hamas on one side and Hezbollah on the other, both firmly supported by the Iranian regime, I can understand the pressure to eliminate the ability for Iran to attack.
Now, you're in the Netherlands as NATO leaders prepare to gather next week for the summit in The Hague on Tuesday. There is pressure clearly on European countries to meet with President Trump's demand and picking up more of the burden in defence spending. Do you agree with the President's position on this, that it is time for Europe to pull its weight, and part of the wider US pivot that we seem to be seeing, or certainly being reported, at this defence assistant away from the region?
So first of all, from my perspective, NATO is a vital entity to global security, and that NATO needs to exist to counteract Russian aggression, as well as the expansion of China. But clearly, over the last 30 or 40 years, the European countries have not pulled their weight and have relied on the United States, primarily from a fiscal perspective, from a weapons perspective, to support NATO. So I do believe that the president's desire to have NATO pull more of the weight is on target. But I don't believe that should be at the risk of NATO's existence.
No, and then you have this interesting quote in the last few days, didn't we, from Rutte, the NATO Secretary General, saying that, I think it was in the UK recently, where he said, if you don't spend 5% and you've got your NHS, the health service, all of these pensions, things to deal with, they're understandable. But you're going to have to get used to speaking Russian, because that's the bottom line. And I just wonder, on an update on that, we're having a situation where the Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez writing to the NATO chief this weekend saying that can they be excused from making this commitment? They've got government issues, the spending issues, and President Trump's weighed in to say they're notorious for underspending. They need to pay what everybody else does. What do you make of that?
Well, I mean, I think you go back to President Putin's comment today that Ukraine is an inherent part of Russia. And that to me lays his cards out on the table. So if I'm Finland, if I'm Estonia, Latvia, Poland, I'm worried. And I think that right there says, where should your priorities be? And I believe they should be defending against what clearly is a threat to the East.
Just take a listen, Jim. This was the exact quote from President Trump speaking to reporters in the last few hours. Take a listen.
Still your expectation that NATO countries spend 5% of their GDP on defense spending?
Well, I think they should do that. I don't think we should, but I think they should. We've been supporting NATO so long. In many cases, I believe paying almost 100% the cost. So I don't think we should, but I think that the NATO countries should, absolutely.
And if a country like Spain decides not to?
Well, NATO's going to have to deal with Spain. Spain's been a very low payer. They were always a very low payer. They were either good negotiators or they weren't doing the right thing. I mean, I think Spain has to pay what everybody else has to pay. Spain has been notorious for low pay. You know who else was a low payer, just about the lowest? A place called Canada. Because Canada said, why should we pay when the United States will protect us free?
Your time, Jim, with NATO and your time in NATO command as well in Afghanistan, when you listen to President Trump speaking and you'll have heard the critics, the accusations that both him and Defence Secretary Pete Hegseth, they don't understand the importance of NATO, and yet you'll understand the system. There will be advisors that tell them exactly how crucial they see the alliance as being. Do you worry that the misunderstanding is going to cost the US?
I do worry. I think that President Trump has his businessman's way of doing things. And if you go into a negotiation and you ask for what you want, you're going to get less than what you want. And so I think typically that we've seen over the last 8 or 10 years that he asks for more than what he wants, and that it accepts that as the bar goes down. And so I think that that's part of his gamesmanship, the way that he does things. The one thing, having commanded a brigade in NATO, a very unique brigade with 9 different countries, was that on the ground, on the surface, the troops work real well together. And so at the higher level, the funding aspect, I mean, it should go by the NATO charter. And I think that President Trump's modus operandi is to ask for more and then negotiate down from there to something that's acceptable.
Given you just mentioned that, I would like a final word on that, Colonel. You know, you spent all of that time with the NATO force in Afghanistan. I was back and forth on deployments to Afghanistan, to Helmand Province, Lashkar, Kabul, a number of times. What do you make of the situation now after all of that work, blood, sweat put into Afghanistan and what we're seeing there?
Yeah, I'm very frustrated. I think that for a small amount of dollars and effort, we could have maintained stability, as we did in Korea, as we did in Italy, and as we did in Germany, where it was a slow build back. But we did. We built back, and those are great countries now. Korea's got the 11th largest economy in the world, and it was decimated in 1953. So for me, it's very frustrating. I lost a lot of friends when we pulled out. I think that although it wasn't a perfect democracy, as some people may have thought, I think it could have improved on the margin with our support. And what's happening there with education, with women, with resources, I think it's a terrible situation, and we created that in a lot of ways.
While you're talking to me, Colonel, there's a update from Reuters here saying this: US military are moving B-2 bombers from mainland USA to the Pacific island of Guam. It's according to 2 US officials speaking to Reuters. What do you make of that?
I'm not familiar with it. I mean, the Guam is a standard jumping off base for B-52s. So I don't know enough about it to comment. Thank you.
Good to talk to you, Colonel Jim Creighton. Great to hear your story as well in Afghanistan. Thank you for speaking to us this evening, and thank you for coming on Front.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate the time.